Okay, so we already did 5 remakes that were better than the originals. How about 5 sequels that were better than the originals? Number 5, Blade 2. Don't get me wrong, Blade was great. Probably, along with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, set the template for what would ultimately become the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even though they themselves were not part of it. You got Wesley Snipes, probably best part he ever had. Little Stephen Dorff being surprisingly good as the bad guy. But what Blade 1 did not have is what Blade 2 has, which is Guillermo del fucking Toro. And also, one of the neatest ideas in vampire fiction, a mutant strain of vampires called the Reapers who eat other vampires. And they are led in the most bizarre but effective bit of casting of all time by Luke Goss. Brits of my generation, when we saw that name come up in the credits, every one of us thought, that Luke Goss? Yes, that Luke Goss, and he's really good in it. Number 4, well, since we just mentioned Spider-Man, why not Spider-Man 2? Because yes, Spider-Man 2 is better than the original, and again, Spider-Man 1 was great. Probably the best superhero movie, really, since the original Superman. Yes, I'm including the old Batmans in this. Watch them again. They're fun, but they're ropey as fuck. But Spider-Man 2 improves upon it in so many ways, possibly slightly unfairly so, because it doesn't have to do the origin story. The curse of the superhero movie, the origin story. While I'm here, respect to the MCU for when they rebooted Spider-Man in Captain America Civil War, they didn't bother with the origin story. And indeed, we've never seen that particular version of Spider-Man's origin story. Because we don't need to. Everybody knows how Spider-Man got to be Spider-Man. But also in Spider-Man 2, we meet Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus, possibly the best ever screen iteration of a comic book villain. It's no wonder they jumped through all kinds of logistical hoops to bring him back. Number 3, Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. Now here's an interesting example of a sequel being so much better than the original that it renders the original entirely superfluous. Because here's the thing, what we think of when we say the words Mad Max, very little of that is actually in Mad Max, the first movie. The Mad Maxiverse, if you will, begins with the second movie. The first Mad Max is just a slightly futuristic, vaguely comic booky cops v bikers movie. The whole gasoline wars in the irradiated wasteland thing kicks in with the second film, which is possibly why it was retitled The Road Warrior for its American release. Because everything you need to know is dispensed with in a flashback sequence at the beginning of the movie. Once you've seen that, you don't actually need to see the first one. So possibly to disguise the fact that it was a sequel to a movie which pretty much none of its intended audience would have seen, it was indeed just called The Road Warrior in the States. Number 2, The Empire Strikes Back. The fact that there is now an extended Star Wars universe is probably due at least as much to how good The Empire Strikes Back was as to how good the original Star Wars was. Yeah, and I'm going to call it the original Star Wars rather than Episode 4 A New Hope. Sue me. If you weren't around at the time, it is genuinely quite difficult for you to imagine the cultural impact that Star Wars had in 1977 and 78. Certainly nothing before that I'm aware of, and absolutely nothing since has been quite that pivotal a moment. There was literally a world before Star Wars and a world after Star Wars. It changed so many things. It changed what movie sci-fi looked like. It changed what TV sci-fi had to compete with. It also had a massive indirect effect on technology. One of the things that really drove the expansion of home technology in the 80s, things like people buying home computers, people getting games consoles, was the explosion of video games at the end of the 1970s. And a lot of those video games were essentially trying to emulate bits of Star Wars. We all wanted to be in the gun turrets of the Millennium Falcon. That's what we all wanted to play. And I'm serious. The popularity of Star Wars drove the video game explosion. That drove the home technology expansion. It wasn't just films and TV that Star Wars changed. So the pressure of expectation on that second Star Wars movie was indescribable. And I think because such is the way with sequels, we just had Jaws 2, there was a general assumption that it's probably not going to be as good, but what the hell, we'll go and see it. It's more Star Wars. So when it comes out, and it's actually, in many ways, better. That's why people suddenly realized that Star Wars was an entire universe of stories to exploit and not just a movie. Because yes, it's darker, but I don't want to harp on about that because dark is a very overrated quality in science fiction. All the characters require more dimensions, even Darth Vader, who's just meant to be this great evil black slab. And of course, it's got that incredibly ballsy ending. in which the bad guys have won and the good guys have barely escaped with their lives. And they don't even escape unscathed. Luke is down an arm and completely traumatized by what he's just heard, and Han has been canned and carted off by Boba Fett to his almost certain doom. So yeah, it was a somewhat shaken 10-year-old Mitch who staggered out of the pictures after seeing Empire for the first time. Before I unveil my top pick, quick dishonorable mention, yep, you knew it, Highlander II, The Quickening. This is the worst sequel of all time. Okay, fair enough, there probably have been worse movies that were sequels, but the point is, this is the sequel that represents the most precipitous drop in quality from the film that came before it. Highlander 2 is so bad, it actually slightly ruins Highlander by its mere existence. It gets literally everything wrong. Starting, of course, with the bullshit sub-Dune explanation of who and what the Immortals are, which is a completely pointless, garbled, nonsensical and over-elaborate attempt to explain something which the first movie explained perfectly elegantly as a kind of magic. Storytellers, don't establish something as being magical in nature and then come up with a cod scientific rationale for it. George Lucas. Okay, number one, you know it's coming. Yeah, of course it's The Bloody Godfather Part 2. What the hell else was it going to be? Francis Coppola achieved the literal impossible in the 1970s. First, he made what was, without a doubt, the single greatest gangster movie ever made. And then he follows it with an even better one. Godfather 2 is so good it almost feels like sort of cinematic laws of physics are being defied. Okay, we don't have Marlon, but we do have Bobby De Niro. And it's so clever and so important that those two stories are told in parallel. The rise of Don Vito is told interlaced with the descent of Michael. And this is why, Walamir, Godfather 3 was always a bad idea. It's not that it's bad, it's that it's superfluous. By the end of Godfather Part 2, the circle is complete and the story is over. We don't need to know what happened next to Michael Corleone. Michael Corleone, in those first two movies, is possibly the most fascinating character in modern folklore. And by the end of it, his story is complete. Because we segue straight from watching Don Vito avenging the murder of his family in Sicily, straight to Michael having his own brother executed. So by the end of Godfather Part 2, Michael, the good son from the bad family who wanted no part in the family business, has not only become the gangster that neither he nor his father ever wanted him to be, he has become the monster that his father never was. And that's why the last time we ever should have seen Michael Corleone was that last shot of Godfather 2 staring out across the lake as the leaves fall behind him. He's won. His empire is secure. He is the most powerful gangster, possibly the most powerful man in America, and it doesn't mean a damn thing. It's perfect. Well, I know there are other sequels out there which were better than their progenitors. Couldn't think of any on the spur of the moment. If you can, into the comments they go. See you soon.